Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Forum's Members Surgery Live, the stream that brings you news, information, and debate from the workplace issues. On behalf of the North East region, my name is Scott Haslam, President of the Leeds No1 Amalgamated branch of the CWU. And in tonight's session, I'm joined by Jane Loftus, a fellow president, indeed the national president of the CWU, Andy Hopping, Postal executive, and Mole Meade, the national Postal executive member. And we want to talk specifically tonight about post-COVID and the environment of post-COVID in the workplace, as well as covering off some of the poll and admin members. So, Jane, would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Hi, Jane Loftus, obviously from Merseyside. I joined what was the post office in 1982, so 40 years next year for me in January. I've worked at both local level, branch level, area level, and I've stood for the LEC and Postal Executive in 2002 and got elected. And I became the first Postal Woman Chair in 2007. And I've been continuing that role since. I have experience right throughout the field, not just in admin, I've dealt with many issues and mergers, and obviously as my role as president and postal executive chair, we've dealt with change and modernising how the union works and deals with its issues and communicates to its members. So that's me in a little round.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Andy?
Yeah, Andy Hopping, postal executive. I joined the then post office, which it was then in 1985. I did probably about 6 months on the counter and then switched over to writing duties in the head post office in Watford. I used to work my day off on overtime and thought that there was more opportunity on the writing side. It then obviously is now called Royal Mail and is a total different business to the post office. I've done a variety of different jobs in admin over the years. I've done collections. I've done overtime on deliveries. Worked in the PS locker. I stood for the executive. It was 2013. Just after we got privatised, so it was a very difficult time to be standing. So been on the executive now 8 years, and you know, I've been part of probably 4 or 5 big agreements that the union have sealed for its members, and I think we've had good continuity over that period. So. Yeah, been about a long time, 85, so 36 years, I think that is.
Excellent. Mole? You're on mute, pal.
There you go. Sorry about that.
It's all right. Technical issues. We're not mad.
My name's Mole Meade. I'm also on the Postal National Executive. I'm the baby of the firm because I didn't start till 1989, and the other two got a few years on me. I got onto the Postal Executive in 4 years ago. I got onto the National Executive 2 years ago. I started life on the counter, and then due to a thing called the Rem 11, way back in 91, I wound up in a Rem branch in South East London, which my branch was where my branch is, and I went into the cash centres thereafter, and I wound up doing a multitude of regional and territorial jobs, and a lot of stuff in London. And I'm eternally grateful to my peers for all the support they've given me over the years, and that's me.
Excellent, thank you for that. So, if you watching. Let us know where you're watching from. Ask your questions in the stream you're in, and we'll pop them up questions, and we'll drop them into the structure of tonight's session. And if you haven't done so, please consider liking the Leeds and North East regional Facebook pages as well as the YouTube channels. So let's get this session into play. So to start off, I think it'd be quite interesting, I think, to discuss and talk about the landscape of work before COVID hit. Jane, do you want to kick that off?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's aware. I mean, we faced at least 10 years of Tory austerity. And in terms of Royal Mail and the business we're in, we were in dispute. We'd got our 4 pillars agreement, then a new CEO come in, and that's basically ripped up, wants to do it his way, doesn't believe the company has a future, an expanded future, but a reduced future. And so we've been in dispute for 4 years. So when COVID hit, we were really in a bad spot, I would say, because we should have had the 4 pillars, which would have helped us, because we'd be more down the line of changing the business and realigning things. But what it meant was, to me, that Royal Mail see the CWU during COVID as an obstacle and the membership as an obstacle, rather than seeing what we could do during a pandemic that none of us have ever lived through before. So where we should have worked together better, we didn't. It was in some ways very toxic in the workplaces. And to be honest, the reps and the members have pulled that round. They're the people who've insisted on, correct work and health and safety. I mean, we've lost people during this pandemic. And that is, a crying shame. And to be honest, coming out of the pandemic and the situation we're in now, you could see, one, what the austerity and cuts have done to the country in real terms, in terms of the NHS, etc., and the state they were in at the beginning of the pandemic and what looks like the future. People were hanging the hats on the Brexit and that everything would be okay. But COVID has absolutely changed everything. It's brought stuff forward. And to be honest, Royal Mail and in work, I think we are in a better place than where we were at the beginning of the lockdown. And that's in terms of future jobs, in terms of the national agreement we've got, the fact we got rid of Rico back and we've now got a new CEO who wants to work with us. But we all know that at some point, I've worked, as I said, nearly 40 years. And in 6 years of my employment, they were trying to sell bits of the business. So this has been a constant loop of trying to reinvent Royal Mail. And to be honest, at the moment, I think we've got a vision for the future, which sees expansion, sees decent jobs and employment and security. And, something that's fit for the future that you can pass on. I just wanted to say just one last thing, and no others will want to talk about other issues. But it also, COVID laid bare where the work is done and what the infrastructure is in this country. People laughed at broadband being in Labour Party's manifesto for people. You wouldn't laugh at that now. That is an infrastructure so that people all have a fair access. And to me at the moment, it's making sure no one's left behind. But we do know that businesses are exploiting COVID big time. And the same way as I would say the Tory government are exploiting it as well. But we need to fight for a different future because now we've got the chance. It's right in those crossroads. And I think some of our deals lead the way in what unions and other workers should be doing. And you need to make sure people are in trade unions because the fight is going to intensify. And I think in terms of job losses, they're going to be in the thousands, if not in the millions. People will be destroyed, but people are also profiting from it. And we need to make sure that the working class don't pay the price for the pandemic, and the cost is borne by the people who could afford it. And we also mourn the people whose lives have been lost too early. And we can never forget that. And I hope the MPs and that keep the memorial in London, you know, where all the red hearts are opposite the House of Parliament, as a reminder that people died who didn't need to die in this country.
Yeah.
So that's where I think we are, and there's a lot to do, and there's a lot to fight and campaign on. But we have to lead the way in the workplace by decent agreements, safe working, and making sure nobody gets left behind. Okay, Scott, over to you.
Thank you. So, Mole, in terms of our post office limited counters, was how Jane explained that picture there of across the broad section of companies, was that echoed in the post office counters?
Yeah, but before I start, I want to thank all the branches that are currently looking in or will be looking in later for all the support they've given my branch secretary, who's currently in hospital. He's been in there for the last 16 weeks now with COVID. He's a dear friend of mine and he is a fighter. But all the support that people have given morally, where they send well wishes and stuff like that, goes an awful long way in this rehabilitation of this vile disease. The next point I want to make really is I can't believe how excellent the whole of the Communication Workers Union's membership has been during this pandemic. We've had very, very little disruption, and when we've had the slight bits of disruption, it's for good reason. And the members have been, in my view, there is no class. They're above the class. They are it. And I want to pay my respects to them as well. But in relation to Post Office Limited, the membership have done exactly the same thing as what they did in Royal Mail. They've stood by the principles of keeping the offices open. They've worked hard. They've worked tirelessly. They've kept going. And then last week, Post Office Limited closed one of their Crown Post offices. So thank you very much. We're out of here. Fortunately, that could be a one-off. They are prepared to talk, management are now prepared to talk to us about the bigger picture, about where we go from here. And maybe we'll end up with workers' cooperatives. I don't know yet. But hopefully we'll get something out of it, because it's a bit rich, really, Scott, saying to people, yeah, keep working. Oh, and as we're coming out of it, albeit we got the third inoculation in September, they're saying, well, see you later, we don't need you no more. Well, yeah. Without the heart of a high street, there won't be a high street. And Royal Mail needs that presence on the high street, which is Post Office, in order to sell its wares. And hopefully a whole lot will come together, mate.
Cool. Yeah. And I think we're going to be covering off a little bit about that high street a bit later on in tonight's session. So, Andy, have you got any more you'd like to add, particularly from an admin perspective?
Yeah, just thank the North East Division and Leeds No1 and Mail for inviting me to this forum tonight. Like Mole, we all know somebody that's lost their life to COVID, and unfortunately the postal industry has suffered because we've been classed as essential workers. So I'd like to put my condolences out there for everyone that has lost their lives due to this pandemic. I think from my perspective, from admin grades, we've been very resilient, and we've had to be, because a lot of our members have taken the brunt and had to work from home. This wasn't popular amongst a lot of our reps, because some people saw maybe a more sinister side to it, where maybe it could be a stepping stone for outsourcing and be careful what you wish. But our members have really well embraced it. And, we've got call centres that have been bombarded, and the work that our members have done from these call centres, because the traffic has gone through the roof with the parcels automation. So with people home ordering, and that means the complaints have gone up. So I think our members have adjusted to it well. I will say that there is time to now maybe reflect and have a look, because I think you only need to look at the news this morning and you see that companies are shaping their future. The bean counters in companies are looking and seeing, do you need 2 days there and 2 days at home, and should we just meet for socialising? So I think there's a lot to add. Where the landscape was pre-COVID, look, we done a deal, the 4 Pillars Agreement. It was a fantastic deal, probably the best the union has done. Every member has got a copy. Terry made sure it went out there. That was carried unanimously. And then suddenly the business walked away from that. And we ended up with 2 years of row, and we had a CEO brought in just to feather the nest for big shareholders. And we were resilient. Our members balloted. We had 3 national ballots. We got to a stage where COVID, it just hit the world. And I tell you what, I think we did, we stood up well. We classed ourselves as essential services. We got our members working. We weren't shy. And I think from COVID, I know that there's a lot of negatives to it, but I think it landscaped the deal to get this pathway for change. Although it wasn't easy, but we did get there by the fact that our members are loved up and down the country. And now we've got a CEO, Simon Thompson, that's bought into this public service ethos. So I think pre-COVID, we were heading into what we thought was a massive collision course, and it's brought us out with probably one of the most first-class agreements, if I don't mind me saying, from 4 Pillars. So I think I can only applaud our members, and especially our admin members that have had to work at home. I know a lot of Royal Mail managers have had to do the same, but I think we've managed it really well. So I applaud everybody for the way they've conducted themselves coming out of this COVID period.
Excellent. Thanks, Andy. So where we now move on to, I think, is I think we kind of touched off with Mole, didn't we, in terms of the high street and what it looked like. So, I think we'd like to sort of explore a little bit what the high street would look like if it wasn't for our post office limited counters, particularly throughout the lockdowns that we've seen over the past 12 months. And, people will know that, quite frankly, everything's shut. The bank's shut, the shop's shut, and it was only the essentials or deemed essential services that remained open. So, Mo, I'll talk about that bit.
Well, over the years, as most of you know, that I've spent plenty of time outside Crown Post Offices trying to defend them. But the evidence is there, Scott. The evidence has been there for decades now, where you close a post office and you basically say goodbye to the high street. I mean, there were places, I'll give you an example, Newhaven, unfortunately. The office, really hard-working people in there, fantastic members. And then the office closed, it went into a sub, and through no fault of anybody, they ended up sharing the high street with a tumbleweed. It was desolate down there. And that sort of story goes right across the country. I mean, it's the length and breadth of Britain. We've got places now that, another one, Uckfield. The post office used to be at the top of the high street. The moment it closed and they put it right down the bottom of the high street, the top of the high street died. Now, as time goes on, when I first started, there was 20,000 outlets for post offices full stop in Britain. We're hovering around the 11,000 mark now. So it's starting to bite. It really is starting to bite for people, because what post offices do that most people don't see is people walk into them and go, you couldn't tell me where the library is, could you? When are they going to do that? The butchers? I don't think so. So we're in a place at the moment where I'm kind of optimistic, because we've got a government currently, who I'm not a big fan of, I have to say, who are saying in one breath, we've got to reinvigorate the high street, it's vitally important, and they start spouting off all this rhetoric. And in the next breath, they're nodding it through to close offices. And if you haven't got a post office in a high street, there is no lost leader. So there is very little reason for most people to need, and we've seen that in the last year, to need to go to a high street, apart from the retail experience. And the best way of doing that is, now the banks have all closed, is to keep the post offices there, build upon that ethos, build upon that energy. Some of the best people, we've been through this terrible deal over the last 14, 15 years around and we'll come on to it, the computer programming system for accounting in Post Office Limited. And we're in a place now where if it wasn't for the staff behind them counters, the post office's name would be mud. And we can't have that either. So that's where I think we're up to, mate.
Yeah, cool. So, Jane, I think it's fair to say that the high streets really were like ghost towns. I think Mole's eloquently put, how the post office has really, I suppose, been the gelling part of what was left of the high street for over the last 12 months. And, in terms of the politics around it, how do you see that panning out?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has brought forward closures of businesses that were struggling prior to the pandemic, especially ones who couldn't, do the high street and the online stuff in terms of an experience of online, as all of us have had to get used to, of, looking, how do you order? You get to know certain companies are good, certain companies aren't, what's an easy model. So they had that problem. That's been exacerbated. That's got worse because of the pandemic. You then have a situation where the post office have a policy of Crown officers, which they fully fund and are paid employees, and a franchise model. Right. Now, I know the Horizon cases are brought to light, what has happened to people, and they're all from the franchise officers. So what's that to me is proven that the way the government, because it's still a government-owned company, have gone for many a year. Andy said it, and so was Mole. It's not just in the last couple of years. It's been over a long term, a strategy of franchising those officers out, so it's not their responsibility. And then they just streamline their own organisation to run those franchises. We need to, which we are doing, and I know Dave Ward, Andy Fury, the officer, and Terry Pullinger are meeting on it, coming up with a new vision of what do we really need and where is that in terms of the high street. Because I think people have been quite shocked as lockdown's being lifted. Depending where you live, you go down to your local shopping centre and loads of shops are closed. Then you start thinking, well, what replaces them? Or do we need a total rethink of, what is the 21st century, high street for us moving forward? So the franchise model, I don't think's worked. But for Royal Mail, we've ended up one of the only postal businesses that's not got a retail arm in the world. So we do need a retail arm. And, I know we've said before we'd like to do some of that jointly with Post Office so that we can look at what is a successful, retail arm that is maybe a bit different, rather than it just keeps getting franchised and franchised. And in some ways, some of the services you probably want to access, Post Office don't provide. I've never understood why it's never been a gateway to government services and an information hub and an IT hub. Do you know what I mean? Because it does connect the people who, to be honest, are the most vulnerable in society. So that's why it was crucial during the pandemic that the Crown stayed open. But I know a lot of franchises shut. So actually the Crown officers had more and more work to do. And some of them literally had to argue day by day about safe working. And some of them tell stories, and it's one of the things, if you've worked on a counter, some people like to visit you all the time because they're quite lonely. Put that in a pandemic, vulnerable people were coming out and then saying, I'll come back in the afternoon because I need something else to do, and weren't looking after themselves. But I think if we cherish the post office and Royal Mail have a look at what you want from a retail arm, you can start to rebalance stuff and bring something different. But I think the issue of the high street is going to come down to councils, going to come down to your local planning, because I think they're a bit stumped of what to do, because there's going to be surplus buildings, because if there's, like if all companies have gone bust, there'll be surplus buildings. So it's what becomes the heart of your high street in the future. And to be honest, some of the independent firms that are coming up and opening companies, I think they're brilliant. Some people have taken this opportunity to look at doing the independent stuff, but instead, how we fund that as a country. But something will desperately need to be done about the high streets. Otherwise, you are just talking major shopping centres and major cities. And in between, people haven't got any choice. And I don't think that's healthy for us as a country. Whether the Tories will put their money into it or the councils, that's something that we'll need to argue locally. But I think the councils really have a job to step up. And while I'm on about councils, I hope everyone's been out to vote, because you should always vote during an election. So they're still open. If you haven't voted, get out there. But to be honest, we need to hold people to account, because cuts are coming to councils. So the idea that we'll bounce back, I think it's going to take a lot of coming together from the people who need these services to say, we want them, we demand them, and this is how they're going to work. And the unions are part of that. And I think we will come up with a vision. That is something we can campaign on and hopefully win on. So we do see a retail arm of the Royal Mail, but we also see, a post office being part of the high street and the rebuilding of it. But you know what I mean? These cuts are going to burn, and people need to know we need to start campaigning about local facilities. And there's loads of possibilities we could do with local town centres and high streets. And that's even access to medical services and mental health services. Do it where people are, that they can come in and do it. But we need to have a different look on what does the high street look like, given now we know what we can do and what we want. And I think independent shops is part and parcel of that as well. Okay, Scott?
Excellent. I think you're absolutely right. And I think you touched on a little bit previously, Andy, in terms of, this home working situation as well. And if we can sort of move on to that aspect about how the admin members in our companies that we represent, how their working arrangements changed through the pandemic for such as home working and such, because people go to work quite often have their meals or meal breaks in the localities, don't they? And that means the shops that have been shut, if they're shut within the high street, then that's impacting on the economy even more. So do you want to expand on a little bit more about the hey up, Andy?
Yeah, sorry, there's a little bit of feedback there. I think Jane, you might be right. People are out voting, so if they're not watching that's the reason. So good luck to all those that are standing in local councils today. I think the home working situation. I mean, our union, we had a postal executive today. It's why it's strange seeing you, Chair, instead of Jane Scott. So I'm always used to following my instructions from Jane. Our union is looking at, I think Unite have got something in place for home working. I am a little bit concerned because we are doing home working due to this pandemic. And as I said earlier on, that people will be looking to exploit the situation. There are a lot of benefits, and I'm sure our members, you know, that one of the things is that you don't have to travel anywhere, and obviously some will be more productive and others won't. So I think on the other side of the union, the other house of the union, the TNFS side, they represent Santander, which for those that have been around a long time would know it as National Gyro Bank or Alliance and Leicester. I think many of us were encouraged, you know, employers in the post office group were encouraged to bank there. I just noticed that they've closed 115 branches. They said it's due to the fact that everybody's using internet banking. And I sometimes think maybe we're being shoehorned into that position. It's the same argument sometimes as the high street with the Crown Office. Some people like going to the branch office. Some people like meeting people face to face. People don't want to do transactions on their phone or on their tablets. They like that. And I believe there is an argument for social inclusion. And it's like that anybody over now the age of 55, we don't, you know, you're not needed in society. We don't want to cater for you. And yes, I think people do want to go to banks. People do want to go to post offices, and people want to meet people face to face and engage in conversations. And I think that that's being taken out. I know that's not what my probably son or daughter would be doing. They'd be using their iPhones and whatever but you know, it's the same as when they took the car tax and the TV licenses out of the post office. They're giving you no choice. And I also think that not everybody is a whiz kid with technology. I mean, some of these calls that I'm sure a lot of us have been doing on GoToMeeting and Zoom, I think people would much prefer having a conversation with people. So I do think that there is a big issue with this, and I think sometimes we could be being shoehorned into a position where things will close, or they will be a stepping stone to phase things out. And remember, not everybody can work from home. I was talking to Zesh in Capita today, and he said that out of his CWU members, probably 35% are coming in. People have domestic situations or not the environment to accommodate working at home. And I think that we must realise that. Some people, you know, want to do it. And I think one of the most important things with any national agreement, and it will go to the postal executive first, and we, you know, is that we make sure that, you know, we are accommodating our members and doing what actually they want to do. But I think there is a little bit of a sinister message sometimes, and as I say, when I watched on the news today that there could be, well, work 4-day fortnights, or you can have 2 days at home. I think, you know, sometimes, or just go for the bits where you engage. I think we really need to look at the full picture. The world is moving on, and COVID is going to make decisions, but we need to make the right decisions for our CWU members. And I think that with a proper in committee, we will have a national agreement that makes sure, and the top part of that national agreement will say it's voluntary. So we will not have people being forced to work at home. And I think that will be one of the top lines and headlines on that national agreement. Thank you.
Excellent. So, I mean, certainly as regards admin, that you're right, there's sort of two categories really: those that can possibly work from home and those that physically can. And then there's also the broader section of I suppose the members that we represent, particularly in Post Office Limited. You physically cannot work at a counter and be at home at the same time. So, you know, it's going to be an interesting debate going forward, and particularly, Jane, you know, how do you think the union might need to approach that debate?
Right. The CWU as a union has had to change during the pandemic as well. So it's not sort of exclusive to just people who are at work and everyone else. And, you know, the union just carried on working as normal. So the CW had to change. I think I'm more than happy on the postal side how quickly we embraced the technology so that, one, we could do all the meetings we needed to do, two, we're all safe, and try and expand that out to the representatives. And actually, during the pandemic, we've probably reached more members than what we'd ever do if we were in one meeting with a select few. And I'm in favour of a bit of both. You have to have face-to-face. I do believe in that. Why wouldn't you? And that's why, in some ways, even though it's been very stressful going to work, some of those members would say to you, I'm so pleased I went to work. They just wouldn't have enjoyed being at home, because it has been potentially, you know, for some people, absolutely destroying of their relationships. Some people have been in danger, and others have found, you know, depression comes on and anxiety and all the rest. So we know that, you know, people like a mix, but we also know we have to deal with reality. I'll say women, if some woman said, I can do my job from home, you know, prior to the pandemic, you would just be told, no, you can't do it, regardless of it. Now is an opportunity to look at what people can do. And I think Andy's right when he talks about the voluntary side of it. Because I may say, well, I'm happy being at home, but I might be sat in a shoebox with no proper equipment and just causing myself, you know, like health and safety issues at work. So I think we have to come up with something where we do cover off the health and safety. We make sure, you know, in terms of allowances for those people, you know, because you're using your own electricity, etc., all that. But I think maybe in the future people would choose different times to do homework, and depending on what's going on in their lives. Some people earlier on with the younger kids may decide homework is better for them. What the technology's proven is just having a static workplace is not necessary anymore. Now, people will say, well, no one will ever join a union unless you're all in a collective. I think that then becomes about how do you get people working from home to be part of the collective? And that's stuff that we will have to look at in the agreement. But that's about unions working differently as well. So we've got people who don't have a workplace right across our union. So we've had to learn how to organise them. And actually Zoom and all these calls have made that a lot easier. And then we have to make sure that if people do want to get involved, they can get involved in their workplaces. So to me, it's all about what we do, you know, the local level in our branches to open it up. But it's a debate I think we need through the union. And it's a debate where we will want other people's views, because I would say male views may be different than a female view. So an older man may say, I definitely do not want to be at home. Whereas a woman might say, this suits me being at home. It suits with all the other stuff I do. But also, Andy's right about the young and the older. Now, some people embrace technology no matter what age they are, and they've been fantastic on it. Young people just use it. And I think we have to speak to those young people. So my daughter's in Leeds, Scott. She finishes her degree in this term. She's 22. And you ask her, how does she feel during this pandemic? And how does she feel her future is? And I think like lots of young people, they feel they've been robbed of lots of things, whether it's access to Europe because of Brexit, whether it's access, you know, to, as she would say, is my qualification worth more than someone else, plus then what jobs there are after the pandemic. So I think on the home working, you have to cover all bases, and you just can't come from your own personal point of view, because all of us have got a bias on what we would personally do and all of that. And sometimes, especially a predominant male industry, may be dead adamant you've all got to be in work, and that mightn't be what other people want to do, or can do, technology-wise do. But what technology shouldn't be used for is to cut and to take away services and to do in jobs. But some of that flexibility, when I talk flexibility, I mean the location of where you work, not that suddenly you change all your hours. So there's lots to consider, and I think we should consider it. But I think it's a trade union movement will be considering it as well, because there's thousands, if not millions, of jobs that are in the same boat. But what you've got to assure is the standards of those where those people are working are like top notch. They are given the correct financial benefits from doing it. And also they are allowed access if they want to change their position in terms of from home working to back in. So it'll be stuff that'll be interesting over the next 6 months, I reckon, where we come to grapple this. And we'll learn from other unions and other agreements, as well as reaching our own. But at the moment, we know if we do anything about working from home, it will be voluntary. But there will be agreements. That's if the business want to, but I presume they will do. But it doesn't mean to say that you're barred from the workplace or barred from the union. It just means we have to now organise in different ways and get used to that you can do both face-to-face and reach a bigger group of people by having access to meetings like this, Scott.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks for that, Jen. I mean, certainly there's a few things what struck a chord with me in terms of my eldest son. He's doing his first year at college. Similar, robbed of his exams. Some people would welcome that because they want, they can crumble under exams. But he worked his socks off all the way through that, and then didn't do his exams. And then for the first year, he's been let off the first lot of exams as well. So he's going to come away with some A levels and not done that. I mean, in fairness, the actual education system's been robbed for the last 12 months anyway, hasn't it? Because they've been in and out of school. But yeah, it's going to be some interesting times going forward. And I think it could be worth moving on to sort of the next area, well, of topic of conversation, really. So we've talked about unionized companies in terms of post office counters and the Royal Mail Group. I know Capita is something else that Andy had mentioned that we do cover as well, and there's a few other bespoke ones such as Santander. But actually, how we've approached things being in a unionized companies that we represent compared to the non-unionized companies, and maybe how has it disproportionately affected those people, and really what are the advice to those people going forward, really. Jane, do you want to come back in at that one?
Yes, Scott. Right. During the pandemic, I've got friends who work in other delivery companies, and they were looking at us and thinking we were really well organised because their working conditions, no way in terms of health and safety and everything. And some of those people have left in the last couple of months because they just cannot survive of what's gone on. I've also got other friends who have said you can have a job, but you need to take 20% pay cut, or you need to take less leave. And there's been no negotiation. And if you look at the fire and rehire situation, especially in terms of the gas, British Gas, it's been an absolute disgrace. And that is the thing where when you say, what is it about being in a union? Whether you're in a unionised workplace, if you come together, whether it's 5 of you, 15 of you, 100 of you, you have a bigger voice and a bigger impact. And I think what you have seen is in some areas, if you look at the teachers, an absolute surge in membership because they were so directly affected. And I think it then comes down to, and again, it's about having people in those workplaces arguing for people to come together in a union. There is always a union for anyone, wherever you work, but you do it along with your friends as well. And once you start coming together, you get the collectivity, and then you get the sort of, and I think this is what we've been really good at in the union. If you look at delivery, you look at counters, these are some big units, but loads of smaller units spread all over the country. And we've managed to organise them in their office. Now that shows if you can organise 20, 50, 100, what you could do with companies who are small as well. And it's all about being in that workplace and being there and then coming together to challenge that company. And unions have started doing it. And if you look at some of the new unions who concentrate in particularly on the most, like the cleaners, the most vulnerable, insecure workers, they're getting great success. Whether that be care workers coming out on strike and getting deals with the companies, because there's so many thousands of different companies. So to be honest, it's via other trade unionists organising with their family, friends, and with other workplaces that will unionise them and that will defend them. And to be honest, the TUC has to step up as well and call for all people to have that access, and that companies are audited to make sure they're paying the minimum wage, the right allowances, and inspections. I'm not being funny. During the pandemic, you would think health and safety inspections would have been everywhere, so that people weren't getting COVID, weren't dying because of the conditions in those places. So I think there is an energy for people, and people feel like they want to be part of something and better conditions. And I think the unions have to adapt. And I think the unions that adapt and more flexible of how they work, whether it's on Zoom, face-to-face and all the rest, they will be the ones who produce the unionised workplaces of the future. And our union, as you know, has just set up a tech branch for tech workers. And I think stuff like that will flourish, because those people, it ends up very individual. And if you have a collective and you all know what you're on and you can negotiate contracts and all that, it makes a real difference to people's lives. Mm-hmm. And I just think we don't fully understand how many people have lost work, money, their terms and conditions from non-unionised places. But as we move in towards September, the furlough scheme finishing, you will start to realise it's in the millions. And that's where the trade union movement should be standing up for those people and actually bringing them into membership and trying to build the unions and get recognition for them. So you've got to fight for the future. It's not going to be handed to us, Scott.
Yes, I agree entirely. Mole, in terms of, because you're from a different part of the world, aren't you, down in London? So how would that, sort of compare down there from perhaps up in Merseyside or Yorkshire or South Central? What sort of conversation you've had with people when you've been out campaigning to support the Crown offices and such, where this is what the unions do and what happened in these non-unionised companies? Because there's a lot of little shops and such about, isn't there?
Well, the first thing I would do is to encourage them to join a union, full stop. But it's really about the 3 E's: engagement, education, and explanation. What we have to do is we have to engage people as a union. It's paramount now that we get as many people into the trade union movement as possible. And we saw that a few years ago with the rush of people joining the Labour Party, because a lot of younger people are hungry for political stimulation or whatever you want to call it. And we need to keep that momentum going and make sure that people across the whole panacea of jobs in this country join unions, because if we can encourage them to do it, if we can say to them, we've become a society recently in the last 20 years where we've become all about the I rather than the we. And we've got to stop that. We've got to turn that around, because as people become more and more impoverished, because unfortunately I think that's likely to happen unless we put our big boots on, we will see people at some very desperate positions, and we need to try and prevent that. So it's vitally important now that all of us, every single trade unionist in this country, if we could all recruit one person into a trade union, that'd double it. And that would be like getting back to the figures that we had back in the day in the 70s and the 80s when I first started work. And I think down here in London, well, what we've seen, like everywhere else around the country, you've seen the gentrification of places that we used to call home when we were kids. Now we can't even afford to live here. You know, there's houses just across there where I live, where I'm in the office at the moment, just over there. They're 1.2 million pound for a 2 up, 2 down with a back addition. Preposterous, absolutely preposterous. And the reason that is because all the people have had to move out of London, the traditional working class people have had to move out of London. And the reason for that is because they had the opportunity to purchase their property. I have no problem with that if that's what they want to do. But in order to give themselves that step up properly, they had to sell the property 3 years later in order to be able to go and pay cash for the house down the line. Now, if we're going to have to... So now their children are having to travel £5,000-6,000 a year in coming back into London just to have a job as a cleaner, because that's the cost of travel to get from out in the rural parts of southeast England into London. So unless we start organising properly, there's so much work to be done around housing, around education, around employment. You're not going to get in the environment. We're not going to get a situation where the majority of people that work in this area that I'm in at the moment actually live in that area for many, many years. And until we can do that, we're going to need to engage people properly through good trade union principles and practices. And until we've done that, we're not going to go anywhere, Scott, I'm afraid.
Excellent. Well, that's the fighting talk that I like. So, Andy, in terms of like non-unit, doing a similar comparison from like the... We've got an echo again. Do you want to cover off about the admin side of stuff and some of the struggles we've seen?
Well, just on non-unionised thing, I will briefly comment. I mean, I remember a slogan and a saying, TUC, get off your knees, general strike now, that we were all singing like 25 years ago. And to be fair to our General Secretary, Dave Ward, he's one that's been pushing that. I mean, he's had a march, a New Deal for workers. He's all about bringing all the unions together and showing some collective strength, because, you know, like we just spoke about British Gas and what's going on with the GMB there and their firing and rehiring, we're all dealing with this piecemeal. And I think our General Secretary was right when he said we need to get back together, and the TUC needs to be a vehicle that can challenge some of these this management. I think I do think, depending which way it goes with unemployment, I think that if we are facing high unemployment with coming out of COVID, I think the problem is it is an employer's world, and that's why people should join trade unions. I mean, they're there for people. You only got to look at the 0-hour contracts out there, you know, your likes of Uber Eats and, you know, some of these white van drivers that are working for parcel companies that we're in competition with decent standards and conditions. I think there was a film with Ken Loach that exposed the difficulties and the stress that people can get involved in, where they just can't make ends meet we're working on these 0-hour contracts. So I do think, you know, and it worried me when Tony Curtins said about when we had redesign in our union, the amount of people that are not joining unions now, and why are they not joining unions? You know, we do need to look at it. As for our admin grades, I mean, we are quite a diverse in Andy Fury's section at headquarters. I mean, we represent, you know, everything from stamps and collectibles to MDEC to, you know, the Capita members working in the call centres. So we have so many people on different terms and conditions, and I think you know, we're all trying to get a slice of the cake with this new agreement, which you know, I know that there's a different dynamics now from the Royal Mail headquarters with Simon Thompson at the helm. So I do think we can value, you know, and get some, you know, get some decent terms and conditions going forward. But I do think a lot of people are going to be out of work. I think a lot of people are going to be struggling, and I think that, you know, our union has dealt with it very well. I've listened to Jane quite a lot there, because it's me who's going to be putting the document to the PE on home working. But I do think there will be consultation with our members, and like what we do with our members and the reps, we'll see what people want. But I think, as I say, it's going to be a precarious world going forward, depending what the unemployment is like. But like Mole and Jane, just go and join a union. We need collective strength and collective bargaining. You'll be better paid. You only get what you fight for. You never get what you're worth. So, you know, if we all join together, we will get something. So yeah, I'm proud of our admin grades. They've done really well through this, and yeah, we're not out yet. I mean, obviously, what's going on in India is a concern. So hopefully, we will be moving out on the 21st of June. But I will say our members have dealt with it very professionally, and I think they're a credit to the CWU.
Cool. Thank you for Andy. I mean, funny enough, when you're speaking about Dave Ward and that world of work and the New Deal aspect, you're absolutely right. And actually, depending what happens today, when we've got the hard evidence of the direction that people, how people feel about the Labour Party specifically, and, you know, against the background of what Dave put out as regards Hartlepool, you know, I think it'd be interesting to have that debate with Dave, perhaps on a session like this, to sort of look at the real future for working people and for the trade union movement as a whole, really. So, in terms of moving the agenda on, because I'm conscious of time a little bit, is to cover off a little bit about some of the, I suppose, successes that a trade union can achieve in terms of this Horizon scandal. So, Mole, what exactly is the Horizon scandal?
Well, it's been quite well documented now over the last few weeks, where 39 sub-postmasters were accused of stealing, basically. And they were proven that it was the computer system that have done it. Hanging off the back of that, it's not 39, it's several hundred people who may be putting a claim in now. So even if it was just 39, it's the largest, and I've got to make this point, it's the largest miscarriage of justice in British history ever. Right? People, unfortunately, and I said this the other day, unfortunately, there have been people who have committed suicide over this situation. And how do you put a price on that? How do you pay recompense against that? I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start, to be quite honest with you, to understand the dynamics of that and what needs to be done. But what I do know is this, is that the governments for the last 15 years, the senior managers for the last 15 years of Post Office Limited, are accountable. They need to be accountable. And the long arm of the law of this country needs to reach backwards and pull them forward to make them accountable. Because it's all well and good us picking on an individual. It's easy to do, the CEO at the time, and saying to her, this happened on your watch, blah, blah, blah. But then there's the chair as well. We've had 2 chairs over the last 10 or 15 years in the post office. And those chairs advise the CEOs on what they should and shouldn't be doing. So in real terms, they need to be brought to book. They need to be accountable. Maybe there might be a custodial prison sentence. I mean, I don't know. But where I would be looking at it is corporate manslaughter first, and we work our way down. Because that's how serious this is. These people did nothing wrong at all. And they lost their livelihoods. When I went with Andy Fury, just before the pandemic, funnily enough, he was giving evidence. We went to Parliament. There was a guy in front of us who basically for the last 10 years had slept on his son's sofa because he lost everything. Absolutely everything. He lost his home, his business, and his prowess, or whatever you want to call it, in the community. He's got nothing at all. He lost everything. That needs paying. That needs putting right. And an amnesty or whatever they call it isn't enough. Financially, is it enough? They talk about 58 million pounds for these people. But by the time everyone's had their pound of flesh out of that, i.e. the legal people, the solicitors, etc., there's not an awful lot of money left. They won't be getting a large amount of cash for this. And it's disgraceful because it needs to be put right. The post office last year even tried to sack the judge in the case. Try to sack the judge. No? Unbelievable stuff. What should have happened, what must happen now is they've got to put their big boy pants on. They've got to grow up. They need to pull it together. They need to apologise profusely, stick their hand in some very large pockets and pay these people properly with dignity and respect. And until that happens, I believe that the CWU will be campaigning vigorously in that endeavour. Thanks, Scott.
Cheers. So, Jane, how do you see the CBU taking that forward in terms of, I suppose, bombarding the MPs to sort of make sure it gets debated properly in the MP?
There's a couple of things to remember, and it's how the post office has been set up: directly employed people, franchise people, right? And to me, just shows how the system doesn't work. So it is absolutely outrageous that the post office could carry on denying there was any problem with their system. And that obviously suited people in the post office. And it was very much a computer says yes. But we know there's been issues in the sub-postmasters organisation. That was an association. And some of those postmasters broke off and are now members of the CWU because they thought they were tied too closely to management. And to me, this is just an example of what happens when basically a company can run roughshod over their employees and the people who are franchised. It could happen in any other franchised industry that they just say, well, the computer program you use, to tie up your finances, whether that's in Costa Coffee or any other franchise, and they say it's you that's wrong, not the system. I won't listen. I think that could be rife in many other companies as well, by the way. So I think we need to look at the model of how we do have branch offices, and should it be on this franchise nature, when it's all their fault. I mean, having been at Hillsborough, having seen other injustices that have taken years, it was nice to see some people in their lifetime get justice. that could have been many, many more years old. I know people have been in jail, but you look at Hillsborough, look the way Grenfell is going. Some of those families never get justice in their life. But I think it's the model the post office work under allowed that to happen. And it's also, and I would say, it's part of the problem of the system we work under, that big bosses who earn lots of money literally do not give a damn about their employees or people delivering their services. And they try and say they're not responsible, and it's always someone else further down the line. And actually what happens is no one ends up accountable for it. So we as a union will continue campaign and be part of it, helping people. But I think, again, it's the talks with the government about what does the post office look like going forward. Does it have to be franchising? I don't think so. That's only there to cut costs and cut responsibility of the post office, because all they do is blame the franchised office. They say it's their fault, and that's it. So I think the talks of the future for a post office should be so important and relevant to all post office workers, whether directly employed or franchised. But I mean, they've destroyed people's lives. Nobody will ever compensate that. No one will be brought back, if they've committed suicide. But it's one in many failings of companies across the UK. And at what point does this stop? And to me, and this is what we keep having to emphasise, there is money in this country. It's the system is rotten, and it's where that money goes. During this pandemic, you can actually map, and it's there officially, the rich have got richer and the poor have got poorer. Absolute disgusting. The idea we even had to fight for school meals for kids during holidays. Absolutely outrageous. And it's those priorities that, one, you fight in your industries you're in, but you fight across the board, because this affects all our families, our friends, anyone who needs to earn a living to survive. So we're right to campaign on it, right to get a decent model, and right to fight for it and ask other people to join us. Because whenever we've campaigned on the post office, we have myriads of people coming forward who want to get involved, whose services rely on them. So I think we have to reinvigorate that. But I think we have to challenge the franchise model. It's been proved to fail. I'm just hoping, and I don't know what other people's view are, that we just don't end up that the post office is bankrupt because of this mess. But those people in charge should be held accountable. Should definitely be held accountable, because they knew what was going on, and they did. But it was one, until someone tells me the computer's wrong, we'll carry on making sure we sack decent people, working people who put their life savers into it. It's just typical of how big business is and how the government is, to be honest, because that's a government business, and the government should not allow their services to be able to do something like this. And they should have their heads in shame over loads of things, but it doesn't seem to be important at the moment. Politicians aren't accountable for anything, and you can do what you like, disrespect as many people as you like, long as they're making their money and buying their £800 wallpaper and getting all their allowances. So I think that's what we have to do, challenge the system that creates it.
Excellent. I mean, certainly Mole did like a podcast show, didn't you, with Spotnik? I'll put the link there. And then that's one thing he said about challenging. It's not just the management, but it's actually the governments, all governments, that it covered the span of that. And, it's quite an interesting podcast, that. So I'd certainly recommend people go off and listen to that one and listen to how Mole put it across. So in terms of, because again, I don't want to sound like we're rushing through that, but I do think actually this whole Horizon scandal could actually do with a session by itself, because it's so juicy and so wrong. And maybe, Andy Fiore is showing interest to come in on and do a surgery himself. So I'm sure we can explore that a bit more in more detail. So if we can sort of like finish off on a slight positive, I think, in terms of the Post Office Limited pension contributions and a new milestone. Andy, do you want to cover off the key points there for us, mate? Yeah, you're muted, mate.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Yeah, I think from the Royal Mail perspective, the new CDC scheme that got Queen's approval, I think that people have been asking when are we actually going to get this pension scheme, because it replaces the old DC scheme, which was really poor. Kerry reported that we can't elect trustees just yet because until it's up and running, but it's going to be there's going to be 160,000 members of this new scheme, and it's one of the schemes that's, you know, part of the new agreement that many of our members voted for, because when they were seeing what pension contributions were there before. I think Mole had something to add to the POL pension contribution,
yeah,
because I know that was a contentious situation within the department, so maybe it's best left for him. But on the other pension scheme, things are moving, not as fast as we would like, but it was one of the biggest sellers of the new Pathway for Change agreement. And we will get there, and our members will see they'll be on a proper pension scheme, which is what we wanted.
Excellent. Mole, do you want to cover off the poll, 20%?
Sure. Firstly, I think it's fantastic that the legislation's gone through Parliament for the CDC scheme, and hopefully one day the POL members will be able to become associate members of that scheme moving forward. Myself and Andy Fury sit on the board for the Post Office DC scheme currently, and what's been happening, you've got it up on the board, up on the thing there. Basically, what we've managed to achieve in the last 2 years, I suppose, is incrementally move closer and closer to the minimum figure that the government wants to see people have in their pension schemes is 20%. Combined 20%. So it could be you pay 1%, the employer pays 19 or whatever. But we managed to get it to 20%, and we think we're either one of the first or the first trade union in Britain to actually achieve 20% contribution for people's pensions, which don't sound like a lot, but it's a good start. It's an excellent start, actually, and I applaud Andy for what he did for that, Andy Fury, that is. But the thing is with that is that now our members, if they pay 8%, the business will pay 12%. And you know, people, I can't advise people, but I can say this: if I was in Post Office Limited, which I am, I'm on 8%, and I would recommend that people go up if they can to that figure, because I'm on it. But I can't advise you to do that. But I think it's a stonking piece of news that we've had. It could set the benchmark rather for moving forwards for if we wind up in the CDC scheme. You know, maybe Royal Mail will be looking over their shoulder going, "Oh, we've got to pay 12% now if this lot are paying 8%." Because we're going to be jumping in there as well one day, maybe, and we'll be wanting to hold on to 12 and 8 and improving that even as we move forwards. Why can't we improve that? Where we freeze it at 8% for us and make it 14% or 13% employers' contribution. Because I'm at the back end of this. I'm in my late 20s, and when I was in my early 20s, I didn't give a monkeys about the pension scheme. But I blinked, like we was having a conversation earlier, if you remember, Scott. I blinked, and then all of a sudden I'm knocking on the door of 60. So please, I implore everybody, if you're not in the scheme, whether you're in Royal Mail, Parcel Force, Telecom, Post Office Limited, no matter what, have a good think about that, because for every pound you put in, they put in more. So you're giving up the opportunity of free money. And I beg you to have a good look at that. And that's where we're up to, Scott. Just a great bit of news for us.
It is, and I think it's a good chance that we can round off of some good news. But in sort of a true conference style, would you like to round up for us, Jay?
Oh, right. Well, thanks for the invite. I think we covered loads of topics. Just on the pensions, when I first joined, same as everyone, pensions were just there, and people, you didn't get asked, did you want to join? You were enrolled into your pensions, and it was an ideology that when you retired, not only would you have your state pension, you'd have your works pension, and that would mean that you could survive. If you look at where pensions are now, 30 years later, I'd say through, it's not called false accountancy, but if you have to account for every person in your pension scheme dying on the same day, and you need enough in it, otherwise you've got black hole of money, that was done to shift the ideology about pensions and about companies paying pensions. But if you look at the world today, state pension for most people, and this is even the older people know, is 67. If you look at your own pensions, you've got 60 and 65. If you've never bought your house, you've got increased rent that you will always have to pay for the rest of your life. And you get into a situation people can't afford to leave work. And then you've got people saying, well, where's all the youngsters coming from? And I remember during the late 80s, early 90s, everyone retiring at 50 and then 55 to bring new people through. So that's how come I joined at 17. Do you know what I mean? There was policies to bring people through. And I think we have to address that again. And I think workers will address that as we move along, because it's becoming such a burden on people to carry on working to such late age with no chance of ever retiring, because either they don't own their own home, or they've got to continually pay massive rent. So I think that that will become a call that younger people take on board, to be honest. And all through the pandemic, there's things that massively inspired me, that give you hope. One is our workforce inspired me massively in terms of what they've done and how they've dealt with things and how they've come together to support the union but support themselves in shaping the company. That's been brilliant. But you then look at the politics during the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement highlighted in terms of BAME members, how far they haven't progressed in generations, and we're going to be dealing with that. Also, the Me Too movement about women, and about women being able to be free from sexual harassment, whether walking around the streets at night time. You know, you shouldn't fear for your life, and you shouldn't fear to be killed while that is happening. And I think there's an explosion of younger people who don't carry the baggage that we had, in terms of you have to conform to certain stuff. You know, you're in the Labour Party, you're in the trade union, you know what I mean? They've got their own way of politics, and I think they're going to come to the fore, because some of the stuff they are doing now is absolutely fantastic. And I think the generation, which is my generation, which I think has done the country a disservice and the globe on some of the politics of it all, we need to allow them that space and then campaign so that we can move away from that space and retire in dignity and have all the stuff you need. People should have care homes and be safe in care homes. People should be able to be fed. So the optimistic point I'm trying to say is society is at a crisis point, and I think the younger people are going to come to the fore and shape their own future. And to be honest, I think they'll have a better future than some of us who've had, who've got to work not only 40 years, but another 10, 15 years on top of that, just to be able to retire, when, to be honest, your body's about telling you you've not got much life left. So to me, always fight for the future, always bring those young people in, always engage, and always fight for our class. And if that means reclaiming our streets, let's reclaim our streets. But, that's where the future lies, and that's where the power lies. And I'm looking forward to us bringing in new people and young people, hopefully on any new cadet schemes that comes in. But we should always remember where we come from. And we were recruited young. Why can't other people be recruited young? Thanks, Scott.
Excellent. Thank you, Jane. I'd like to wrap it up now. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us, Mole, Andy and Jane. I think it's been a really interesting and I think thought-provocative type conversation we've had. And I think actually there's more conversations we can have on some of the aspects that we've covered tonight. So it'd be great to have you back on at some point in the future, for sure. So without further ado, that concludes tonight. So remember, unity is strength. Thanks for watching.
Oh.